Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. Let's continue with this now. With just 8 days to go before the elections, we look at various aspects that speak to our democracy. This as the country marks 30 years of a democracy now. Today, our conversation will be centered around the importance of the minority vote in this elections. Political analyst Bongani Mahlangu joins us now via video link to weigh in on this discussion. Thank you so much for your time, Bongani. So when we look at how inclusive, would you then say some of the political or the policies in party manifestos, especially when we speak to representation of the minority groups in South Africa, like, the so-called the colored vote or pink vote, as it relates to the LGBTQI plus community. How well would you say these are documented and inclusive?
No, thanks for the opportunity. Greetings to you, Nati, and viewers at home. So we must just look at certain issues that over the past couple of years in South Africa, there's been a rapid rise as far as identity politics are concerned. They've risen to a point where they now are a threat to our democratic consolidation, where you even have issues such as the pink vote, a colored vote, and so forth, undermining what is written in our constitution as far as developing a country that is non-racial, non-sexist, united and prosperous, or to achieve a prosperous society. So now there are theories of perception here. And the theory of perception is that if you do not see a colored person in parliament, therefore the interests of coloreds will not be catered for. If you do not see an LGBTI or queer member in parliament, that community's interests will not be catered for, undermining the logic and rationality that we live in a space that is intersectional. So as so much as you may be colored, but you're still affected by an economy that is suppressed, that causes unemployment, you're still affected by crime, you're still affected by each and every other thing that there may be. Also, there's this perception that because maybe parliament is dominated by a certain ethnicity, it therefore champions the interest of that ethnicity. But that is not statistically correct. For example, you can look at parliament now, the existing parliament, outgoing parliament. The majority there, or the dominant racial group, is African. However, the same Africans are the most unemployed people, above national average. And then you find that in terms of demographics, as articulated by Census 2022, the second biggest racial group in South Africa are coloreds. But you find that employment among the white population is above, or rather unemployment is lower than the colored, is lower than the African population. Also, if you look into the African population, so there may be a majority, but then there are only minorities in terms of representation, let's say, for instance, in the JSE, in terms of the executives of the JSE. So then there is this illusion of minority majority. But because it makes sense right now for certain organizations in order to lobby a certain demography in order to get votes and representation in parliament, they're evoking such things. But then if you look into also the policies, or rather the manifestos, as you had asked, you find that these manifestos cut across. If you're saying you're going to create jobs, those jobs are going to be each and every South African. If you're saying you're going to improve healthcare, let's say, for example, the NHI, when it comes to full implementation, whenever it does, that will cater for each and every South African, whether you are queer, heterosexual, homosexual, you are tall, you are short, you are this, you are that. As long as you are a South African, you'll be catered for. So there are no basket of policies that speak to a specific group, because all groups are affected by the same things. However, that does not mean there are certain groups that are not severely impacted by certain things. And therefore, there has to be an approach, there has to be programs that speak to then redress the marginalization of those groups from certain things. Yeah. But all in all, if we speak about the pink vote, we have a Bill of Rights that caters for each and every South African, and each and every South African Africans' right to existence has to be protected.
Bongani, I want to come in there, but why are we then seeing so many political parties, using that to their advantage? I mean, we've been seeing a lot of this happening, particularly in the Western Cape and some parts of Gauteng, where political parties, for instance, will say that we are going to this particular area because the people here feel that they've been excluded. For instance, the coloured community in the Western Cape, as an example, or maybe people in the Western Cape that are majority black also then feeling excluded. And we've seen some political parties capitalizing on this.
So that goes back to how fragile our democracy is. So much as it's been 30 years, but it remains to be very fragile. So fragile that such things do arise, and so fragile that there is, to some extent, still structural racism. And structural racism, at times, it then manifests into certain programs where you find that the distribution of wealth or distribution of budgets is not proportional, or it doesn't speak to those that need it the most. I'm making an example of the Western Cape in this instance. But also there is then, you find that judicial and legislatively, there are accepted constraints, meaning, as I said, like, let's say in the Western Cape provincial government or provincial legislature, there can be a judicially and legislatively accepted constraint that you don't really need coloreds to be there or blacks to be there. But then the problem comes only when, as so much as there may not be proportional representation, however, when then there is underrepresentation as far as socioeconomic issues are concerned, so meaning when a certain population, a certain group, a certain demography experiences socioeconomic disadvantages as a consequence or as a result of a behavior of that government, then that is where the problem is. And that is where then you find that it becomes fertile ground for an organization, a political organization that wants to enter the electoral market and gain a share of that market, to come and say that, but there is socioeconomic injustices here and they are born out of your identity. So then it becomes an identity issue. And that's why I said that this then is a threat to our democratic consolidation. So, but these things have to be looked at thoroughly, because those are serious issues. And if those issues are that distribution of wealth or distribution of resources is because, or people are being disadvantaged because of their race, then such things must be taken serious, because those are constitutional issues. Bongani, those are issues that seek to undermine South Africa.
Yeah, I think I got your point there. I don't have a lot of time, but just to that point, you're raising these systemic issues. I mean, over the past few elections, in fact, far back as 2009, we have seen a low, turnout of voters. I mean, would you say then that is one of the attributes, could be, the lack of inclusion in policies, but also just undermining the democratic process that we've seen over the past 30 years, would you say?
Again, so when we come to demographic or identity politics, you'd find that the lower turnout is experienced mostly in the African community or the so-called black community. And then that then becomes a contradiction, because if you look in terms of representation, as far as the national government is concerned or parliament is concerned, it is dominated by that very same demography. But that very same demography in parliament has been unable to ensure that it lifts up the people that look like them, that sound like them, that talk like them. So that means there's no correlation between representation and delivery of service. And that is why you find that community is disgruntled to a point where they are voting with their feet. They are choosing not to pitch. And that is why if you look into the big organizations such as the ANC, it has been experiencing electoral decline as a consequence of that. So if it was there to champion their interests, it has not been doing so. So then there's no correlation to say, if you look like me, you'll represent me better. And if you do not look like me, you'll not represent me at all, or you inadequately represent me. So there's no empirical evidence of that happening. So a lot of people are angry. So it's not just the colored community that is under-serviced, but almost every other community is under-serviced as well. But for political mileage, for political point scoring, certain organizations will arise and say, but colored people, you have been ignored for a very long time. Look at your communities, unemployment, drug abuse, gangsterism. If that is not found in certain communities, well, because if you look, that is an Indian community, but the same is experienced. If you look into Alexandra, that is an African community, but the same is experienced. So it has nothing to do much with how you look, but it has everything to do that socio-economic injustices of the past have not been reconciled up until today, 30 years into democracy, and that needs to happen. So transformation needs to happen, redress needs to happen with immediate effect, unless we are going to see a problem for all communities, except the community that is currently dominating the economy of this country, currently dominating the land ownership of this country because of failure in redressing certain things in the past.
Absolutely. Bongani, thank you so much for your time and, of course, your analysis, the political analyst there, Bongani Mahlangu.